When I was an undergrad student, I experienced firsthand
The
discrimination,
discrimination, the
the
violence,
violence,
and the
and the stigma.
stigma that drug users live with each and every day. It wasn't a research project, it was my life. I was using OxyContin, fentanyl, and heroin. I go to school in drug withdrawal, and during desperate times, I'd sell back textbooks for money. During an increasingly traumatic period of my life, when I saw 5 family members diagnosed with cancer, my mom paralyzed and unable to work, my family go bankrupt, and the community that I grew up in facing mass unemployment, drug use was the only stability that I had in my life. Contrary to what many people would believe, I found my direction and purpose in life when I was an active drug user. I'm recovering from drug policy and not from drug addiction. Today, today the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs is here to say, let us in. We demand inclusion into the decisions that impact whether we live or die. The only way we can fight against the stigma that prevents so many of us from reaching our full potential is if we can destigmatize ourselves. The government cannot destigmatize us. I repeat that. But in order for us to be able to truly destigmatize ourselves, the only way forward is through drug decriminalization and drug legalization. The only way forward is also recognizing us as being the most important stakeholder in our national drug policy. Most of us live and die because of decisions made in boardrooms that we never ever see. Instead, we see the insides of prison cells. We see our friends die on a daily basis. We see people belittle us, judge us, and minimize our ability to function. One of the most difficult perceptions that we encounter is a public belief that we are unable to or not responsible enough to make decisions for ourselves. Perhaps this explains why almost all the people making decisions on our behalf do not have lived experience as current or former drug users. My life experience led me to believe that my health and quality of life were determined by decision-making processes that were far from my control. To have your voice be irrelevant in discussions that are vital to your health and well-being is to feel like you don't have a voice at all. However, as part of the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs, I found strength in a voice. Together, our organization demands access to employment, policy decision-making, and program development that holds so much power over us. I witnessed the worst outcomes of our policy, not because of my own drug use, but because of changes that were made well above my head and the heads of other people who use drugs and completely removed from our context. What I am referring to is the OxyContin reformulation in 2012. OxyContin was removed from the pharmaceutical marketplace and was no longer available for prescription. Instead, more often, I'd see people selling heroin and fentanyl. As a result, the next year, my home province, Ontario, had more drug overdose deaths than at any time in its history. Like many of us here today, I survived an epidemic. People who use drugs are survivors. Despite public belief, people who use drugs are some of the bravest, resourceful, and hardworking people you will ever meet. To survive in that sort of environment, you have to adapt to an ever-changing set of circumstances. You have to carry on through the worst traumas, sometimes without even a moment to process it. We are not pathetic. We are not cowardly. We are not criminals, but we are criminalized. Some of us, owing to racial or gender discrimination, are more criminalized and feel the worst effects of prohibition. We have so much potential, but because the substances we use are prohibited by law, our potential is oftentimes never met. This is why we need to expand access to heroin and opioid-assisted treatment. After I finished my undergraduate education, I took my life experience as a person who uses drugs and used it to inform my educational and career goals. I took an experience during my active use when a friend told me that I could go to prison for calling 911 at the scene of an overdose, and I turned it into a research question. From that research question, I wrote a thesis. Because of that thesis, I received a master's degree. I use this to illustrate a point to everyone here. The thing that you are most ashamed of, that you're made to feel that you can't talk about in public, that we're all too commonly discriminated for, is the same thing that can get you a master's degree. It's the same thing that can save lives, improve the public health of your country, and prevent more overdose deaths. In British Columbia, someone dies every 12 hours of opioid overdose. Here in Ontario, it's every 14 hours. Each death is needless. An expected 800 people will die in British Columbia this year, and a comparable number in Ontario. However, across the entire world, not a single person has died inside a supervised injection facility. But federal legislation requires 26 different pieces of paper and permission to open a supervised injection site. There is no other public health intervention that requires this level of scrutiny to provide health care to a marginalized group. Bill C-2 reinforces the notion that we are unable to make decisions for ourselves, and it means an entire community makes decisions on our behalf. Decisions that our lives will not wait for. We call on our federal government to repeal Bill C-2, expand access to heroin-assisted treatment, and allocate federal funding to help our drug user organizations grow and show you the potential that we are so capable of. Thank you.